I am bound to love him, though he be sunken in vice and degraded. The law knows of no exception. It claims my love for him. I must love him. I am not bound to take him to my house. I am not bound to treat him as one of my family. There may be some acts of kindness which would be imprudent, seeing that by doing them I might ruin others and reward vice. I am bound to set my face against him, as I am just. But I feel I ought not to set my heart against him, for he is my brother man. And though the devil has besmeared his face, and spits his venom in his mouth, so that when he speaks in oaths, and when he walks his feet are swift to shed blood, yet he is a man, and as a man he is my brother, and as a brother I am bound to love him. And if by stooping I can lift him up to something like moral dignity, I am wrong if I do not do it, for I am bound to love him as I love myself. Oh, I would to God that this great law were fully carried out. Ah, my hearers, you do not love your neighbors. You know you do not. You do not hardly love all the people who go to the same chapel. Certainly you would not think of loving those who differ from you in opinion, would you? That would be too strange a charity. Why, you hardly love your own brothers and sisters. Some of you today are at daggers drawn with them that hung on the same breast. Oh, how can I expect you to love your enemies if you do not love your friends? Some of you have come here angered at your parents. And here is a brother who is angry with his sister for a word she said before he left home. Oh, if you cannot love your brothers and sisters, you are worse than heathen men and publicans. How can I expect you to obey this high and mighty command, love your neighbors? But whether you obey it or not, it is mine to preach it, and not shift it to a gainsaying generation's taste. First, we are bound to love and honor all men, simply because they are men. And we are to love next all those who dwell near us, not for their goodness or serviceableness toward us, but simply because the law demands it, and they are our neighbors. Love thy neighbor as thyself. But now, what am I to do to my neighbor? Love him. It is a hard word. Love him. Well, I believe, says one, I never speak an unkind word of any of my neighbors. I do not know that I ever hurt a person's reputation in my life. I am very careful to do my neighbor no damage. When I start in business, I do not let my spirit of competition overthrow my spirit of charity. I try not to hurt anybody. My dear friend, that is right as far as it goes, but it does not go the whole way. It is not enough for you to say that you do not hate your neighbor. You are to love him. When you see him in the street, it is not sufficient that you keep out of his way and do not knock him down. It is not sufficient that you do not molest him by night, nor disturb his quiet. It is not a negative. It is a positive command. It is not the not doing. It is the doing. Thou must not injure him, it is true. But thou hast not done all when thou hast not done that. Thou oughtest to love him. Well, says one, when my neighbors are sick round about, if they be poor, I take a piece from the joint for dinner and send it to them, that they may have a little food, and be refreshed. And if they be exceedingly poor, I lay out my money, and see that they are taken care of. Yes, but thou mayest do this, and not love them. I have seen charity thrown to a poor man as a bone is thrown to a dog, and there was no love in it. I have seen money given to those who needed it, with not one half the politeness with which hay is given to a horse. There it is. You want it. I supposed I must give it to you, or people will not think me liberal. Take it. I am sorry you came here. Why don't you go to somebody else's house? I am always having paupers hanging on me. Oh, this is not loving our neighbor, and this is not making him love us. If we had spoken a kind word to him and refused him, he would have loved us better than when we gave to him in an unkind manner. No, though thou feedest the poor and visitest the sick, thou hast not obeyed the command, unless thy heart goes with thy hand, and the kindness of thy life bespeaks the kindness of thy soul. Thou shalt love thy neighbor. And now someone here may say, Sir, I cannot love my neighbor. You may love yours, perhaps, because they may be better than mine. But mine are such an odd set of neighbors, and I try to love them, and for all I do, they do but return insult. So much the more room for heroism. Wouldst thou be some feather-bed warrior, instead of bearing the rough fight of love? Sir, he who dares the most shall win the most. And if rough be thy path of love, tread it boldly, and still on, loving thy neighbors through thick and thin. Heap coals of fire on their heads, and if they be hard to please, seek not to please them, but to please thy master. And remember, if they spurn thy love, thy master hath not spurned it, and thy deed is as acceptable to him as if it had been acceptable to them. Thou shalt love thy neighbor. Now, if this love for our neighbor were carried out, love, real love, it would prohibit all rash anger. Who is ever angry with himself? I suppose all wise men are now and then, and I suspect we should not be righteous if we were not sometimes angry. A man who is never angry is not worth a button. He cannot be a good man, for he will often see things so bad that he must be angry at them. But remember, thou hast no right to be more angry with thy neighbor than thou art with thyself. Thou art sometimes vexed with thyself, and thou mayest sometimes be vexed with him if he has done wrong. But thine anger towards thyself is very short-lived. Thou soon forgivest thine own dear self. Well, thou art bound just as soon to forgive him. And though thou speakest a rough word, if it be too rough, withdraw it. And if it be but rough enough, do not add more to it to make it too much so. State the truth if thou art obliged to do it, as kindly as thou canst. Be no more stern than there is need be. Deal with others as thou wouldst deal with thyself. Above all, harbor no revenge. Never let the sun set on thine anger. It is impossible to love thy neighbor if thou dost that. Revenge renders obedience to this command entirely out of the question. Thou art bound to love thy neighbor. Then do not neglect him. He may be sick. He may live very near thy house, and he does not send for thee to call on him, for he says, No, I do not like to trouble him. Remember, it is thy business to find him out. The most worthy of all poverty is that which never asks for pity. See where thy neighbors are in need. Do not wait to be told of it, but find it out thyself, and give them some help. Do not neglect them. And when thou goest, go not with the haughty pride which charity often assumes, not as some superior being about to bestow a benefaction, but go to thy brother as if thou were about to pay him a debt which nature makes his due, and sit by his side and talk to him. And if he be one that has a high spirit, give him not thy charity as a charity. Give it to him in some other way, lest thou break his head with the very box of ointment with which thou hadst intended to have anointed him. Be thou very careful how thou dost speak to him. Break not his spirit. Leave thy charity behind thee, and he shall forget that. But he shall remember well thy kindness towards him in thy speech. Love to our neighbors puts aside every sin that is akin to covetousness and envy, and it makes us at all times ready to serve them, ready to be their footstool, if so it must be, that we may be so proved to be the children of Christ. Well, says one, I cannot see that I am always to forgive. You know, a worm will turn if it is trodden upon. And is a worm to be your exemplar? A worm will turn, but a Christian will not. I think it foul scorn to take a worm for my exemplar, when I have got Christ for my copy. Christ did not turn. When he was reviled, he reviled not again. When they crucified him and nailed him to the tree, he cried, Father, forgive them. Let love, unconquerable love, dwell in thy bosom, love which many waters cannot quench, love which the floods cannot drown. Love thy neighbors. And now we'll have done with this command when we have noticed how we are to love our neighbor. It would be a good thing if some ladies loved their neighbors as much as they loved their lapdogs. It would be a fine thing for many a country squire if he loved his neighbors as much as he loved his pack of hounds. I think it might be a high pitch of virtue if some of you were to love your neighbors as much as you love some favorite animal in your house. What an inferior grade of virtue, however, that appears to be. And yet it were something far superior to what some of you have attained to. You do not love your neighbor as you love your house, your estate, or your purse. How high, then, is love thy neighbor as thyself, the gospel standard? How much does a man love himself? None of us too little, some of us too much. Thou mayest love thyself as much as thou pleasest, but take care that thou lovest thy neighbor as much. I am certain thou needest no exhortation to love thyself. Thine own case will be well seen to. Thine own comfort will be a very primary theme of thine anxiety. Thou wilt line thine own nest well with downy feathers if thou canst.